Pat.
I got that.
You're gonna be done.
But it's set sheets. It has what folder.
Was that the highlight slide or whatever?
I don't have it.
Like I gotta get. I'm running through the others. Hey, what the- No, I-
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Transit Management Committee and Rail Management Committee meeting for March. Before we get started and before Pat takes roll call, I'd like to welcome Yamshid from the City of Glendale on my right. He is joining the committee to represent the City of Glendale. Welcome, Yamshid.
Thank you.
Okay, Pat, if you don't mind, taking roll call.
Morning, everyone. City of Avondale, Harold Ziguina.
Present.
City of Buckeye, John Willett. Chandler Ryan Peters. City of El Mirage, Amber Wakeman. Town of Fountain Hills, Dave Trimble.
Here.
Town of Gilbert, Mary Goodman.
Hi, this is Jason Hafner as proxy for Mary Goodman.
Thank you, Jason. City of Glendale, Yamshid Mehta.
Here.
City of Goodyear, Kenny Knutson.
Here.
City of Mesa, Scott Butler.
Present.
City of Peoria, Chris Hallett. Amber Williamson. Here. Town of Queen Creek, Shay Yoakum.
Here.
City of Scottsdale, Nathan Dome. City of Surprise, Brendan Espy. City of Tempe, Rosa Inchausti.
Present.
Chair, we do have a quorum and can proceed.
Thank you, Pat. You did see Ryan Peters
Yes.
rolled in.
I'll make an entrance.
Okay. So just as a reminder to the committee, if a committee member would like to ask a question or make a comment during the meeting, please type your comment in the box and it will be read out loud and answered. All meeting attendees, please mute your computer microphones or phones. Appreciate it. We'll move on to item number 1 for public comment. The public will be provided with an opportunity at this time to address the committees on non-agenda items and all action agenda items for the joint RPTA and the MR meetings agendas. Up to 3 minutes will be provided per speaker unless the chair allows more of at their discretion. A total of 15 minutes for all speakers will be provided. Pat, do we have any public comments?
No, ma'am, not today.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 2, the Chief Executive Officer's report, and I'll turn this over to Jessica.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committees. Just a few updates for you this morning. On February 20th, together with City of Phoenix and Creighton University, we celebrated the naming event at our Thomason Central Station. The station is now named with a point of interest as Creighton University, which is signaled on the windscreen, as you can see here in the photo, plus on the announcements that our operators make when they arrive at that station. Thanks to Councilmember Pastor, Hillary Foos of our Marketing and Communications team, and our partners at Creighton University, including Father Hendrickson and their Board of Trustees for making the station naming happen. City of Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego, Chair Pastor, and former Economic Development Director Chris Mackey joined us at this event. So this is a celebration of a wonderful partnership and one of many higher education institutions who have deliberately located along the light rail or streetcar system across the valley. So we're super helpful to celebrate this transit-oriented development. Please. Next month, we are going to be operating in partnership with City of Phoenix Public Transit, some special service programs for the Women's Final Four that's coming up here in downtown Phoenix on April 2nd through 5th. We are well accustomed to hosting mega events here in the Valley. We're operating our normal bus and rail schedules, but we will always have trains available to augment that service level, particularly in post-event periods. We'll have enhanced details from our intercon security team. Our customer experience coordinators will be out assisting riders across the system. We're also offering a ticket partnership with the Mortgage Matchup Center for this event. We have been talking about a special events program in the context of our fair administration program. So we look forward to being able to introduce more programs like this. And you can see in this image a wrapped train that will be supporting this event and will be visible throughout Phoenix, Mesa, and Tempe. So thank you for the transportation and the marketing communications team for supporting that event. And speaking of our team, March 18th is Transit Employee Appreciation Day. This is a national day of recognition for especially our frontline team members who support our riding public every single day. We're thanking our teams through a series of communications and events, including videos, some featuring board members, city staff, and Valley Metro staff. We'll have thank you messages on our awareness monitors throughout the system, as well as signage inside of our vehicles, drawing attention to the important work that our transit workers do. So special thanks to our team. We look forward to celebrating that entire week. Next slide, please. Finally, just a look ahead at our March calendar. And in response to the scheduling of the League of Cities and Towns meeting, our board meeting is a week later this month. We're going to be meeting on March 26th, also at an 11:30 instead of an 11:15 start time. We'll be back on our normal calendar for the month of April, and this committee will meet on April 1st. That is not an April Fool's joke. We'll actually be here April 1st. That concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Jessica. Appreciate it. We'll move on to item number 3, consent agenda. The consent agenda is presented for action, and I will ask the committee if there are any questions or if there are any items that need to be pulled for separate consideration.
This is Harold from the city of Avondale. Just more of a question. I'm fine with approving the consent agenda as it is, but out of the for the fair inspections, it shows that we're the the current provider is conducting about 20% of reviews of fares. I'm just wondering, out of just curiosity, do we have any numbers in regards to what the percentage of fare evasion actually is when they're performing their work? If we have any information on that, just more of a curiosity question than anything else. So we can move forward with the consent agenda as is if we can, and answer that question afterwards. I'm okay with that.
Thank you, Harold. It looks like we are prepared to give you a response.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I'm Don Schneidmiller. Everybody, I'm the Deputy Chief of Security for Valley Metro, Madam Chair and members of the committee. There has been a little confusion when we share percentages. For our security contractor, the scope of work and the contract requirement is that they inspect 20% of our total ridership. And I think it's at times that has been interpreted to mean that we have a fare compliance rate of 20%. I've even heard a fare avoidance rate of 20%. We're in the midst of Valley Metro wide taking a look at the new fare collection management system, the way we deploy our intercon security services folks to check fares. It's kind of fluid right now in trying to identify a reliable figure that lets us know what fare compliance and fare evasion is. I can tell you recent observations I've had on our system have shown that approximately 70 to 80% of the folks whose fare is inspected, they do have valid fare. But there's a lot of variables that we're still working out in terms of our fare collection management system. We know it's a priority, and we're giving it an organization-wide look.
Thank you. Jessica, did you want to add anything else?
I do not. Mr. Seguinza, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yeah, I understand the performance evaluation for the contractors, and they got to conduct 20% at least reviews, which they're meeting it, which is fantastic. Yeah, just a curiosity question: what have they found in that 20%? How many are fare payers? How many have avoided? If we don't have a current system to track that, understandable. If we look at that into the future, that'd be great, because I think it's just some good numbers to kind of understand and know how many folks are actually avoiding fares in our review. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mr. Butler?
thank you. I just want to echo, I appreciate the emphasis that staff is putting on this. One of the things that I've heard from my elected officials is that this is an area of concern, an area that they really want to see us make some strides as an organization in fare compliance. And so I appreciate the comments that were just made, and look forward to this continuing to be an emphasis of RPTA, that we can go back and be able to talk about the strides that we're making in the right direction of ensuring fare compliance. And we spent a lot of resources on the new fare collection systems, and so I think it's really important that we really drill down how that's being implemented and what that means for our fare collection. So with that, Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Any other?
I think I'm up first, so I'm going to stay close to the mic if that's okay.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay. So we still have to take.
Sorry? Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Just eager.
You can stay there if you'd like, if you're that eager. No worries. We can balance it all out. So once again, any other questions or comments? Doesn't look like any. So thank you for those questions. Request a motion and a second to approve consent agenda items 3A through 3F.
I'll move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Amber. Thank you, Keeney. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, and that motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 4, the administrative office lease contract amendment. And I'll ask Jessica to introduce this item, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This item is before you for recommendation to advancing to the board an award of a contract for our administrative office building. This is the building that we're in currently. We did conduct a competitive procurement process seeking spaces that would either serve to replace or to continue our current lease, which expires on June 30th of this year. We have been located within this building for 15 years. We did seek out board and city feedback throughout this process. And accordingly, the lease that Angie is going to present to you today takes a conservative approach. While staff has grown considerably over the last 15 years, just as our transit system has, we've occupied the same footprint. We are proposing that we proceed with the same footprint that we're occupying today. Should there be an expansion in the future that would require additional space either here or at a different location, we would take it up at that time. Angie DeVore, Interim Chief Administrative Officer, has done a phenomenal job of running the lease program, and I'd like Angie to provide a presentation to you this morning.
Thank you, Jessica, Madam Chair, members of the committees. This item, as Jessica had mentioned, addresses our lease expiration as of June 30th, 2026. The recommendation provided today is very fiscally conservative, avoids major relocation costs, and secures below market pricing. So to give you a little bit of background and context, the administrative offices, as Jessica had noted, have been here since 2005. The lease was extended in 2014, and as agencies' needs continued to grow, was expanded in 2017. This location houses all of the administrative functions supporting transit operations. With the lease expiring at the end of June, we're at a decision point now. We can either extend the lease or we can move. To ensure a market-based and financially sound decision was made, Valley Metro engaged a real estate professional on state contract who issued a request for proposals outlining our space and operational requirements. Our priority was clear: strong financial terms and long-term flexibility. We evaluated 4 locations. They included Renaissance Square, Collier Center, Central Station, and our current location. After careful evaluation, remaining at our current location emerged as the most cost-effective option. The proposed amendment provides substantial financial benefits: 22 months of free rent, almost 2 years, valued at over $3.67 million, an average lease rate of $30.03 per square foot, which is $5.69 per square foot under the market. Operating expenses will be reset to a base year of 2027, retroactive to 2025, November 25. What that means is that retroactively, we will not pay for any operating expenses from November 2025 through December 2027, and that will result in a savings of $223,000 for fiscal year 26 alone. Additionally, we have some enhanced parking terms with 35 reserved parking spaces at no cost and over $900,000 in visitor parking value over the lease term. Equally important, renewing now avoids the significant relocation costs and prevents disruption to more than 70,000 square feet of administrative operations. While the lease provides long-term cost certainty, it is deliberately structured to preserve flexibility. It allows us to maintain our current space and without disruption to core administrative functions. The agreement includes options to reduce our footprint up to 50% or terminate early in 2034 or 38, subject to notice and fees, providing a clear off-ramp should needs dictate. In addition, we retain expansion rights within the first 2 years under the same terms and conditions, should we wish to use those, as well as 2 5-year renewal options at the end of the term. So as noted, Valley Metro is looking at this from a very fiscally conservative near-term approach by maximizing our existing footprint. And I would say further maximizing the existing footprint through space reconfiguration and flexible work arrangements. The lease includes approximately $2.2 million in tenant improvements, which will be delivered turnkey, meaning that there are no out-of-pocket costs to Valley Metro. The agreement also provides $475,000 for furniture, fixtures, and equipment to go ahead and either populate those spaces or to support that reconfiguration. Additionally, the landlord has committed almost $800,000 for our use between 2033 and 2036 for additional reconfiguration without having to use agency funds. This is just simply a recent example of how we're maximizing our existing footprint. As space needs have evolved, we've converted, former file room storage to a functional cubicle workspace. Because records are now maintained digitally, we are looking at ways of repurposing areas to be more productive and efficient. And then to answer the question, why renew versus relocate? This location provides us with below market rent at the lowest cost per square foot among the options evaluated. It avoids significant relocation costs and operational disruption, provides almost 2 years of free rent valued at more than $3.67 million, and includes approximately $3 million in landlord-funded tenant improvements throughout the term of the lease. The staff recommendation is presented on the slide before you for your review and consideration. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll ask and request if there is a motion and a second to approve the recommendation as presented on the screen.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Mita. And all of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any objections? Any abstentions? Doesn't look like it. That motion passes. So we'll move on to, thank you very much, to item number 5, update on the Proposition 479 Transit Life Cycle Program Development. And I'll turn this over to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committees. We are moving through a significant transition in regional transportation funding with the introduction of Prop 479, which of course began on January 1st of this year. Within Prop 479, one of the most significant changes is the transition of the Transit Lifecycle Program from Valley Metro RPTA to MAG. Valley Metro has been working for some time hand in glove with our partners at MAG to prepare for this transition, and we're continuing to move through this process. Earlier this month at our Board of Directors meeting, we hosted a joint study session between Valley Metro and MAG to introduce Prop 479, including some of the policy changes and implications for transit operations moving forward. As always, I want to note that Prop 479 is the largest source of funding for Valley Metro RPTA, though not the only source of funding. We'll review that in just a moment. So now I will turn it over to my colleagues, Michael Escherman at Valley Metro and Arminta Saeed from MAG. And Ken Kessler from Valley Metro.
Absolutely.
Ken's been in the hot seat all week. I nearly forgot.
Yeah, I have a couple other presentations to do. All right, Madam Chair, members of the committee, just want to give a brief overview, sort of give some context of the Valley Metro budget. So first of all, looking at the combined RPT and VMR budget for the current fiscal year 26, about a $590 million overall budget. And here also how the budget is funded, basically through the public transportation funds. Currently, we still have some remaining Prop 400 funds available, as well as Prop 479 that began generating January 1 of this year. We also have member city contributions that help fund our overall budget, a significant amount of federal funds. And then we also have Arizona lottery funds, about $11 million each year that we receive for disbursement to the member cities, as well as use for specific programs. Now, moving on to the RPTA budget specifically, here you'll see this is a graphic depiction of the overall budget for RPTA. So the total budget of $356.6 million, total operating and capital. In terms of the first pie chart to the left showing the revenues for FY26, you see that the Proposition 400 PTF revenues, by and large, the largest funding source, and that actually does actually include the PTF from Prop 400, as well as most of the second half of the year. That is actually 479 PTF revenues. Also member city funds, as well as federal funds, being the other major contributors towards funding the RPTA budget. And then on the expenditure side, bus operations and demand services, paratransit and ride choice are our two biggest pieces of the overall budget on the RPTA side. with a number of other smaller items included in there. Now moving on to the Valley Metro Rail budget for FY '26, an overall $233.1 million budget this year. Again, looking at the revenues that support the budget, pie chart to the left there, you can see a vast amount of that is federal funds, as well as Prop 400 PTF that we're using to basically move forward through closing out the projects that recently went into revenue service, like South Central, and still some trailing costs for Northwest Phase 2. And then on the expenditure side, you could see, again, still light rail operations being the vast majority of the overall VMR budget. Still in FY '26, rail expansion expenditures happening. Again, as I mentioned, those major capital projects winding down, still have significant trailing expenditures to close out those projects. And then you can see state of good repair being the next largest portion of the overall budget. And just a note there is, obviously, as our system ages, state of good repair becomes a bigger, more critical part of our overall program. And then with that, I will now go ahead and turn it over to Michael Eschman.
And our mentor.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks, Michael. Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. Thank you for having me here today. Before we get into today's update and the latest on our development efforts, I'll begin by providing some background on some of the principles guiding the new 479 program that were approved as part of the 479 plan development back in 2021. So as Jessica had mentioned, over the last year or so, we've been working in partnership with Valley Metro to fully develop the new 479 program. And it's been a complex effort, mainly for two reasons. Firstly, the program, management of the program is transitioning from Valley Metro to MAG in an effort to consolidate all of the lifecycle program decisions at MAG. So not only are we working on updating program assumptions, we're also concurrently developing new processes to figure out exactly, how we'll be working together to manage and deliver this new program. And then secondly, if you look at the differences between how regional transit funding is managed from Prop 400 to 479, there's a significant change in how that is now going to be moving forward. And so also been working with a lot of your staff to really develop what those new processes, how those rules exactly will get implemented. And before I get into some of those significant funding policy changes, it's first important to understand a little bit of the Prop 400 funding framework, because it's really the lessons learned from that program management that fed into developing this new framework under 479. So under Prop 400, really after the Great Recession and due to the significant revenue shortfalls that occurred, the regional transit funding was managed through a fixed allocation approach, meaning every jurisdiction received a fixed proportionality of the total 400 revenues over the life of the program. And while this really did provide that stability that was really needed at the time, as we went on and the conditions changed, our region evolved, there were changing market conditions. What it didn't allow for is flexibility to respond to some of those changing conditions. So that was really one of the main underlying principles that our policymakers wanted to address moving into this new 479 world. So with the 479 program, really the framework is centered around a performance-based formula funding approach to allocate funding for bus operations. And really the intent of doing that is, number one, to provide that flexibility, because that gets revisited. So as performance changes, the allocation under the formula program can also change. And in addition, it is intended to incentivize the relatively small pot of regional funding available for transit to those really high performing routes, help build up that full transit system. There is, of course, funding allocated for a number of other transit components. You can see that here on this slide detailed out. Today in particular, we'll be talking about bus operations, funding for bus operations. That's really been the focus of our effort over the last year or so, knowing that it's a critical input into your local budget development process. So what that entails is those top two, the bus operating assistance, as well as the regional services. The bus operating assistance is funding that further gets broken out to jurisdictions to then spend on local fixed route operations. And then with the regional services, so express service, ADA service, as well as some of those supporting elements that help continue support the overall region-wide operations, that the cost of those is fully covered through the regional transit program before then the funding gets allocated out to the formula program. So that's what we'll be talking about today. So to further nail that down, you can sort of see here in this graphic how exactly that total pot of funding gets allocated to those different subcomponents for operations. So in the TLCP, there's really one main funding source that's eligible for use on bus operations, and that's the sales tax funding. So you take that total pot of funding, and first we had to account for what you can think of as the cost commitments or the cost-based allocation. So that's really showing there in the middle, base allocation, ADA, express, regional services support, as well as a local match component for bus capital elements. And then the funding that's left over after accounting for all of those is then what goes into that formula pot to then be further allocated out to agencies based on performance. Oops. So we'll be giving today an update on the latest numbers for each of those elements, but I'll just briefly provide some additional detail related to each of these components. So with the bus operating assistance, you can really think of that as made up of 3 tiers, mainly 2 tiers. First, you have the base allocation, which is sort of, you can think of that as the funding floor, the guaranteed funding that agencies will receive on an annual basis as we transition to this new framework. And what that's intended to do is make sure that there's funding available for existing service as we transition from Prop 400 to Prop 479. So while that is based on the cost of existing service, once it's calculated, you can then use it for any service, but at least you know the amount that you'll be getting every year. And then on top of that, the funding pot is the formula pot, which is really that performance-based funding that I had mentioned a little while ago. It is that pot of money that gets revisited on a biannual basis to review the latest performance elements, so ridership as well as revenue miles, and that's how the amount gets calculated that each jurisdiction will receive. And then a small subset of the formula program is set aside for seed funding or for use on emerging markets, knowing that there may be new emerging markets over the next 20 years that may not necessarily have already a built-up ridership base or anything like that. So that's why there's a small amount that's set aside for the emerging markets. Before I get into that detail, there is a provision under the formula funding for circulators. Bus operating assistance, all of it is intended to really be used on local fixed route operations. So this is the only provision for circulator service. It is 10% of the total formula funding that then gets allocated out to circulators, also based on performance. And then with the seed funding program, it's another 10% set aside of the formula program. And really, it's a sort of 4-year pilot of a new route or an extension of a route to a new market with a sliding scale over those 4 years for the local match component. So starting out in year 1 being heavily regionally funded, and then hopefully as that ridership base, that market builds up by the end of the pilot, shifting more to be locally funded. And then once the pilot is completed, if jurisdictions choose for that route to continue, it can then become eligible for the formula pot. And then finally, with the regionally funded ADA service, so this is one of the regional services components that's fully funded through the Regional Transit Program. It only specifically applies to the ADA service that meets the federally eligible criteria, knowing that this is a critical service, a federally required service that we need to continue to provide, but knowing that we also needed to put some parameters on that cost so that there would be funding available for some of the other elements as well. So the strict federal criteria being that the trip has to be within a 3/4 mile of a local fixed route bus, and then the riders have to be ADA certified. And at this point, I will turn it over to Michael to go through the rest.
Thank you very much, Arminta. Michael Eshelman, Deputy Chief of Service Planning, Madam Chair, and members of the TMC and RMC. Let's talk a little bit about what the new Prop 479 TLCP program, how it will work and what the funding picture will be. Let's begin with the largest funding bucket within the program, the base allocation for bus service. The original Regional Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Investment Plan, what we'll call the RSTIP from here on out, forecast there would be $68 million in bus expenditures when accounting for inflation. But based on recent factors that I'll go into, the number has climbed to $86 million, which outstrips the current funding estimate. This updated figure was developed by MAG as follows. The fiscal year 25 regionally funded mileage was multiplied by the actual contract rates for that same year. The fare revenue number from the previous year was then subtracted from that figure to determine the base allocation figure, which is then updated annually based on the consumer price index. While accounting for inflation explains a portion of the increase in estimated bus operating costs, there are several other key factors to discuss as well as context for those factors. The original fare box recovery ratio estimated for the calculation was around 12%, and in the ensuing years, there's been a decrease in ridership due to the pandemic, as well as a base fare that has not changed since 2013. With a lower fare box recovery figure, there is a larger chunk of bus service that must be funded with the base allocation. In addition, contract rates have increased as much as 42% in the years since the original RSTIP. This is due to several factors, but key among them is the very nature of a long-term contract, which locks in rates that hew close to the base year, but then are subject to significant rate increases once the contract is up, as the rates will snap up to where the market had moved while the contract was locked in. In addition, there's a substantial increase in labor costs coming out of the pandemic. These rates weren't without benefits, however, as the new East Valley bus contract resulted in very real improvements in reliability. On-time performance has improved from the mid 70% range to the mid 80% range. Missed trips have also dropped to less than 1/3 of what they were with the old contract. To put these cost increases in context, the next several slides will compare the region's experience with increasing costs to those of the nation and other peer regions. This chart shows 2 lines. The top line shows growth in transit operating costs since 2010, indexed to 1, meaning the 1.62 number on the far right of the top line is 62% higher than agencies were spending on operating costs in 2010. And to be clear, that top line is the national cost figure. The same figure for the Phoenix regional transit costs rose 33%, which is the bottom line, about half the national rate. I can certainly attest to how accurate this number is and feels coming from the Bay Area, because our cost per hour figure was about $200 in 2015 and almost $300 last year. That change alone gave me significant experience in crafting solutions for ensuring we provided the maximum level of service to our constituents under very real budget pressure. Moving on to how we compare to some of our peers, our cost per mile figure is about $11, or 65% of the average of our peer regions. As a region, we do a great job of providing service as cost effectively as possible. To put a finer point on this peer comparison, the MAG region only allocates about $74 per resident, which is about 27% of the average funding per capita for our peer regions. While operating costs for transit have risen, a key contributor to the pressure on the formula funding program pot lies in large part with the overall low level of transit funding in the region. The second largest bucket within the base allocation is ADA services. The RSTIP initially forecast about $40 million in costs in 2020 dollars, or about $43.5 million in 2027 dollars, accounting for inflation. However, the most recent update revealed costs of $56 million, which places further pressure on the formula account that serves as the backstop for costs that exceed the base allocation, as well as for service improvements above and beyond the base allocation. The reasons for this increase in the ADA bucket, which includes paratransit, dial-a-ride, and ride choice services, are varied but boil down to an increase in trips in general, and the fact those trips tend to be longer as the region has grown. To be clear, demand response services respond to demand, which is to say that as more people ride these services, they will cost more, and fares have not kept up. Digging into these issues, we've identified some opportunities for improvements around pricing and brokering trips, which is the process of matching riders and with services that I'll go into a little bit later. The final, I just heard a voice in my own head. Okay. The final bucket of this is a day in the life. The final bucket of expenditures I want to go through is regional support services. While the overall size of this item is smaller than ADA or bus operations, the change since 2020 was significant, so we wanted to understand it a little bit better. What we discovered was that, leaving aside inflation and labor cost increases, the regional support services bucket grew in large part due to newer expanded programs that have been moved into regional support services. Taken together, fare administration, the mobility center, and regional call center comprise almost $14 million. Now that we've gone through the issue we're facing, which is that increasing costs have resulted in an estimated formula pot of only $4.5 million instead of the forecast $47 million for Prop 479, let's talk about how we're going to go about making that formula pot bigger. The goals for identifying solutions are threefold. We want to maintain fiscal year 2027 stability and minimize impacts on local budgets. We'd like to preserve long-term health of the regional program, and we want to maintain alignment with the RSTIP framework. For MAG, this means the following in terms of implementing Prop 479. For bus operations in fiscal year 2027, ongoing regionally supported services will be fully funded, including any costs above the base and formula. This means no service reductions will be required in fiscal year 2027. For ADA services in the same year, the strict FTA paratransit coverage area and eligibility rules will go into effect on July 1, 2026 to allow time to implement ADA program updates ahead of fiscal year 2028 without pressure on local budgets. For fiscal year 2028 TLCP, the full Prop 479 suite of policies will be implemented consistent with the RSTIP, providing room for adjustments based on feedback through the MAG committee process. I want to talk through what we're looking at in terms of how we can operate service better. For fixed route bus service, including local, express, and circulators, we've focused on the bus network redesign as the most effective means of improving ridership, increasing fare revenue, and managing the cost of providing services. By reworking where the routes go and how often they run, we can get more people on the bus, which will translate to more fare revenue, thus increasing the funding available for the base allocation and formula pot. In addition, bus network redesign represents a real opportunity to design the routes themselves so that we can operate them more efficiently. This means matching frequencies to round trip times so every bus in service is being used effectively. In addition, we're bringing to the board today, or bringing to the TMC today, an item discussing our findings from the first round of bus network redesign engagement. We believe that through some efforts with respect to the back-end run times for the service, that we can make tangible improvements in the efficiency of the service and reduce the number of buses and operators required to operate the existing level of service. And if we want to, we can find opportunities to improve service as well. With respect to demand response service, we identified several very real opportunities to improve how we deliver it. We believe there's an opportunity to combine or regionalize demand response services, but we understand that's a longer term discussion. In the short to medium term, there is an opportunity to centralize the brokerage services so that a single broker assigns trips regardless of who's operating the service. In the short term, Valley Metro is evaluating the feasibility of insourcing the brokerage for our own services and providing a single point where the broker can assign a customer to either paratransit or ride choice, depending on their specific needs. Right now, if a customer calls for paratransit, they will get that service, even though ride choice may be a better, cheaper option. Let's briefly go over some policy tools we can explore that could yield improvements to the formula funding pot. I promise I'm nearly done. With respect to fares, we believe there's a real opportunity to evaluate the current fare structure and pricing to determine how fares should play a role in the regional funding mix. With respect to contracting, the Valley Metro Board Ad Hoc Committee on Procurement will play a key role in identifying and vetting opportunities for finding more efficient ways to support and deliver service. We can also look at where it makes sense to streamline or combine contracts to take advantage of economies of scale. Finally, we should leverage grants to fund services that would be eligible for formula, circulator, and seed funding. We could also explore with our cities how to translate capital grants into opportunities to improve average vehicle speed. In transit, time is money, so the less time a bus spends stopped at lights or in traffic or picking up passengers at the bus stop, the more service you can provide. Improvements such as signal priority, queue jumps, and bus lanes, as well as boarding policy changes, such as all-door boarding, can keep buses moving. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this important program, and we'd like to open it up for discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Michael, Arminta, and Ken. Appreciate it. I'm a recovering therapist, Michael, so you have voices in my head.
What's your hourly rate?
We should chat about that. So I'll turn this over to my colleagues and ask if there are any questions. I know I have some comments or questions, but turn to all of you to see if there's any comments.
Chair.
Yes.
To begin with, and thank you. The fact that you've got some near-term implementation items to consider, that's very refreshing. Thank you. But what I'd be interested in, and perhaps this committee would be interested in knowing, if there's an estimate to, if we were to continue with these near-term implementation items, then what would be that net effect on the formula-based items that are likely experiencing anything between 85 to 90% of a loss as is predicted right now? So is there any information you can provide? Is this near-term implementation heading towards solving that deficit?
I'll take that. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mehta, for the question. So what I can tell you is relative to where we're at presently, we're going to talk about the Valley Metro FY27 proposed operating and capital budgets in a moment, is that we have already identified some savings. I hesitate to provide yet a cost figure for what we think we can achieve. And in part, I want to be clear that not all of these savings would be attainable in fiscal year 2027, that budget cycle. Some of them will take a little bit more time, changes in contract structure, et cetera. But I can tell you we're chipping away at it, and that formula bucket will improve. With respect to, and I think Glendale has oft cited, the formula bucket is 91% less than the original projection from MAG in 2019. I do not expect that we will overcome that gap for a couple of reasons. Number one, this was a high-level projection from 2019. Here we are looking at a 2027 implementation. We've been able to put a finer point as the team reviewed on what the components are of that, specifically the regional services bucket. And then the second point is whatever efficiencies we can achieve through doing business differently. Michael mentioned, for example, insourcing our paratransit dispatch function, bringing more productivity to the system through changes to routing schedules and the way we construct them. Efficiencies are there. But what we can't do is roll back the clock on inflation, and inflation is the single biggest driver of that cost change. have answered your question, Mr. Mehta, and maybe I just want to add, this is going to be an iterative conversation that we'll be having in the context of the FY27 budget process. As these things go, just as soon as the FY27 budget process is completed, we begin working with city staff pretty quickly on the FY28 budget process. So some of the bigger contract changes, bus network redesign, that's going to play out over the course of FY27, moving into FY28 and beyond.
Thank you, and I appreciate the response here. As has been stated by Glendale's representatives, both at the board as well as at the MAG level, the formula-based program is the one that we'll be most interested in, only because it's the one that has had the highest performances in the past, and those are the very programs that are being most affected due to this deficit. So perhaps some extra effort towards restoring some higher level of allocation towards the performance-based or the formula-based aspect of funding is, I think, where we need to go. This has been stated by our representatives at the board level, so I'm not going to repeat it, but that's the position that we're coming from.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mehta. And again, I would say we are working to achieve cost savings. The formula-based program in the past has been only theoretical. In fact, the performance-based program was only introduced in January 1 of this year. And so the past figures have been projections. So this is the first introduction of the formula-based program, along with the base allocation, the seed funding, the circulator funding, which replaces the past construct, which in the latter years of Prop 400 was based on jurisdictional equity or per jurisdictional allocation. So we are putting the formula-based theory to the test for the first time presently.
Okay, appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. Mr. Kinney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Had a few questions or just comments. I think the one thing, and I know we all had representatives at the previous meetings and making comments and our concerns. I think one thing, just a couple questions. Going back to the original, the TLCP funding at levels at the beginning, the 4 buckets, are there firewalls between those 4 buckets, between the high capacity transit capital, the bus capital, the regional services, and the operating assistance, or are they standalone, or are they all one big bucket?
Madam Chair, Mr. Kennington, there are no official firewalls in state statute or anything like that, but there is policy direction as part of the RSTIP document that outlines how the funding will go to these different components.
The other one, the comment up there about the ADA and the strict implementation of FTA rules on that, is that a change, or is that a maintaining where status quo? Because I know you've talked about keeping FY27 the same, but that kind of sticks out as something, as highlighting it as if that's something a change from what we're doing today.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, so it's a shift from how the regional transit funding could be used from Prop 400 to 479. So basically, in the new 479 program, the regional funding can only be used for those trips that meet the federal criteria, no change to the federal criteria, whereas under Prop 400, jurisdictions could choose to use their allocation on an expanded ADA paratransit service. So in some senses, that's where the change is coming in, that additional expanded service can still be provided should a local jurisdiction choose to do so. It's just that the regional funding would not be eligible for use on that.
And I guess as a follow-up to that, will cities in those situations who are now no longer eligible to use for those kind of trips, are they going to be notified, and when would we be notified of that? So that obviously we're all in our budget time period trying to make budgets out for starting July 1, and I want to make sure we are aware of those as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. One of the things, we are looking to implement that new rule starting in fiscal 2027, but knowing that, we were just able to put these numbers together and give an update to you very recently while you're well into your budget development process, we wanted to also ensure that there were provisions perhaps set aside for those agencies that may be required to cut back on their program or don't have a different funding source to continue supporting their program. Wanted to ensure that we gave you that time to do so, to transition it down through fiscal 2027, but we will have those numbers and roughly the sort of ratio of your total trips very soon.
Yes, thank you, Arminta. And
If could, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I also want to add to that, actually with the 479 rules, and I learned this somewhat recently myself, with the 479 rules for ADA going into effect with FY 27, actually every jurisdiction except for the town of Gilbert gets more funding than they do currently. Under Prop 400, remember JE was the guiding principle, was the principle, right? And so there was a certain amount of ETF available for each jurisdiction. So each year, years back, there was a sort of a cap for each jurisdiction established with a year-over-year growth rate. And so there was only a certain amount of PTF available based on JE balances and so forth to each jurisdiction to use. So now, since all ADA is completely regionally funded, every jurisdiction is going to have more funding for that demand services than they had been using under Prop 400, except for Town of Gilbert.
I want to add to that, the landscape of funding changes, and that does matter. So for paratransit, for all of our demand responsive services, of course, we have data on those trips, where they begin and where they end. And we can readily determine what trips and thereby what customers would be impacted by this change. We've been providing this information to the staffs of our member communities. Mr. Knudsen, I'll inquire with Mr. Eshelman offline after our meeting and find out what conversations have happened with Goodyear, because as I'm sure you are all aware, the demand responsive service, this is where the mass transit becomes very individualized. And so defining those specific trips is of key importance.
Thank you. I think the only thing else I was just a comment, as far as the data that gets presented, I know the Phoenix region, just as a recovering service planner.
I'm sorry.
Is that the Phoenix region is a little bit different than the rest of the country on how we contract our service, or we don't, we don't self-perform our service, we contract it out, and that's not the same around holistically the same way around the country. And so when you look at cost escalations, those can be a little bit different because of CBAs and third-party contracts and things like that. So I think it would be good to note some of the differences between, say, Phoenix contracted service and Valley Metro contracted service, and maybe other service agencies around the country who do third-party contracts rather than just lumping them all together into employees that are operating for the transit agency or operating the service versus contracting out to third parties.
I think that's astute, yeah, and that's the opposite was the environment I came from. So
We can provide that information. We've done this peer benchmarking already, and this content was included in earlier presentations. I think the original slides are meant to, we had like 80 slides to choose from in the deck. For obvious reasons, we pared it down, but we do have that information that we can share with this committee after the meeting.
Thank you, Kini. Any other questions or comments? I think in my last comments, thank you for the presentation. Really appreciate it. I know I mentioned this in our MAG meeting regarding this topic. Obviously, Tempe being a multimodal city, we're very much in support of the formula that you're presenting for obvious reasons. But also, I believe meeting people where they are, the flexibility, Arminta, that you mentioned, what we've learned from 400 that informs 479 is knowing the flexibility is needed, right? So a biannual review incentivizes even the smaller communities to do what they can to create a regional connection, whether that's adding one bus route. And in Tempe, we always pride ourselves on meeting people where they are. And as a regional body, we have to look out for a regional connection. And I do think that new formula really affords that wherever any town or community is, to have that network, which only increases the quality of life for people. So that's important to us. So I just wanted to explain my comment on that. And then specifically the in-source brokerage that you mentioned, Michael. I love the specifics of that. So when we talk about cost savings, every community is going through that right now. We just mentioned our budget. It's a grueling process. I saw Gilbert this morning. They were going through a budget retreat, if you can believe that, a retreat of budget. And I'm like, I'm glad I'm going to other meetings. But to the comments that have been made, we're all struggling at trying to make sure our budgets are scrubbing down all those numbers, making sure that it just offers the best results for our community. And it's just tough. So I appreciate that you're looking and trying to fill that gap that was identified. But more importantly, I appreciate the specifics of sharing the in-house brokerage. It's just those specifics help us tangibly understand what Valley Metro is doing to help us fill that gap. And that information and data is very appreciative. It's just one example. So thank you all for the comments, and we'll move on to the next item. I know this is information only. So moving on to item number 6, travel and expenditures. There are any questions from the committee? I'll take those questions or comments now on the item number 6. Doesn't look like anyone has any comments. So I'll move on to item number 7, report on current events and suggested future agenda items. Ask my colleagues if they have any recommendations for suggested future agenda items. Hearing none, I'll move on to item number 8. Next meeting is scheduled for, the TMC RMC is scheduled for Wednesday, April 1st, 2026 at 11 a.m. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. Thank you, Keeney. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Amshid. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I see no one's opposed, just my voting. So motion passes. Meeting is adjourned at 12:01. And given time, we'll roll right into the next meeting. Transit Management Committee meeting is adjourned at 12:02. We'll move on to item number 1, consent agenda. The consent agenda is presented for action. And I'll ask the committee members if there are any questions or if there are any items that need to be pulled for separate discussion or consideration. Seeing and hearing none, I request a motion and a second to approve consent agenda items 1A through 1C.
Harold from Avondale, move forward.
Thank you. And do I hear a second from?
I'll second.
Thank you, Amber. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
That motion passes. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 2.
Can I get who made the motion in the second, please? I missed that.
It was Chris. Is it Chris?
Harold.
Oh,
From
Harold.
Avondale.
Thank you, Harold.
Of course.
And Amber was the second. Thank you. Item number 2, the transit buses, heavy-duty contract amendment. And I'll ask Jessica to introduce the item.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the TMC. We have been working for some time to create a stable and predictable transit asset management program. And with respect to our bus fleet, this means right-sizing the bus fleet to the specific routes that we operate, but it also means creating a fleet that has a rather even cadence in terms of our new bus purchases and our maintenance. Ideally, we would have an average fleet age that is right at about midlife. And what that does is it minimizes or evens out the number of heavy maintenance programs like midlife overhauls that we would have over the course of each year. We know we have lower maintenance costs, obviously, in the earlier life cycle of the bus. And these buses, by the way, have about a 12-year life cycle. So over the last couple of years, we have been adjusting our purchase cadence. The item before you today is the realization of that new cadence of bus purchases. Ideally, we're replacing those 12-year buses, about 1/12 of the fleet every single year. The item before you requests approval for spend authority on an existing contract that we have with Gillig. I'd like Greg Thompson, who's our Deputy Chief of Bus Fleet Maintenance, to walk you through this program.
Well, thank you, Jessica. Good, I think it's afternoon, Madam
Yes.
Chair, members of the committee. So this is exactly that. This is the request to purchase 8 heavy-duty CNG diesel buses that will replace a like-for-like on heavy-duty diesel buses. The vehicles being replaced will have, at time of replacement, will hit 15 years. So there are a couple milestones that we look for when we're replacing vehicles. As Jessica was talking about, we use the FTA recommended minimum useful life, but then we also start applying our own internal useful life benchmark that surpasses those minimum requirements, but also gives us the ability to forecast vehicle purchasing over the course of time so we don't have those ebbs and flows of purchasing 64 buses one year and 0 buses the next year, and we're always kind of behind the gun. So this is a great financial tool, so we plan financially 12 years out. I can tell you what vehicles we're replacing 10 years from now, what the cost will be with today's plan. So under that plan, this is part of that. We're asking for an extension of the current contract through the Washington State Purchasing Cooperative, bringing the aggregate value to $42,306,180. Table 1 in your packets reflects the cost of each bus, the cost of training, and a 7.5% contingency. Table 2 takes that dollar amount and reflects what the usage of the 5307 funds and the match from PTF will be to show the extended addition to that contract. And with that, are there any questions I can answer?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions from the committee? I think you're good. So if there are no questions or comments, I'll request a motion and a second to approve the recommendation as presented on screen.
I'll move approval.
Thank you, Amber. Motion by Amber,
Second.
second by Keeney. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? No? Okay. That motion passes. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item number 3, payroll services contract. Jessica, I'll turn this to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our Chief Financial Officer, Ken Kessler, is in the hot seat all week, and he will deliver this presentation.
Glad to be here.
Hi.
Thank you, Jessica. Madam Chair, members of the committee. This item is for a new contract with ADP, a payroll processing services firm. We have outsourced our payroll through ADP for many, many years now. They've provided us with excellent customer service. They provide an excellent platform to process payroll, and it really brings an efficient approach to processing payroll for an agency of our side. So just for a little background, a few years ago, shortly after I started at Valley Metro, we had embarked on a review of potentially insourcing the payroll function for the agency. We had a fairly new overall ERP system, our Oracle core system. Part of that was an optional module for payroll. And so we were exploring whether or not to purchase that module and implement that. Through the review of what that would entail with the consultants and looking at that to insource it or to have a potential of a hybrid approach to payroll, it was determined that continuing to outsource is the best, most efficient way for an agency of our size to continue forward. So with that, we had a contract we were under for this. Now the existing contract is up for expiration, and we have an opportunity with a cooperative contract to continue to engage with ADP to provide our payroll services. So this would provide us with a 4.5-year term due to the timing of the expiration of the cooperative contract with ADP through a cooperative agency called Omnia Partners. So before you now, we have a recommendation to continue with ADP under this new contract, cooperative contract for 4.5 years. And the recommendation is before you on the screen. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ken. Any questions? Comments? No? Okay. And then at this point, I will ask for a motion and a second to approve the recommendations as presented on screen for item number 3, payroll services contract award.
Motion to approve, Madam.
Thank you. Thank you. Motion by Jamshid,
Second.
second by Ryan. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? And that motion passes. Item number 4, update on bus network redesign progress. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Very much related to our Prop 479 conversation, Michael Eshelman will provide you with your first update on the process underpinning the bus network redesign.
All right. Good morning, Chair, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Michael Eshelman, Deputy Chief of Service Planning, here to present the bus network redesign progress update. The bus network redesign is a comprehensive operational analysis of our system, evaluating how effectively and efficiently it performs. It offers a real opportunity to align the service we provide with how people are moving around our region. We haven't performed such an effort in decades, and in the ensuing years, we've seen a great recession, the emergence of new mobility offerings, and a pandemic that fundamentally shifted where, how, and when people work. Our network hasn't kept up, and our customers are letting us know their pain points, as I'll discuss today. The consultants and project team have completed significant work to date, including an evaluation of the market for transit service and an evaluation of how our service is performing. The first phase of engagement was completed in the fall and yielded actionable insights into how customers perceive the system and how they'd like to see it change. Our project team is developing the public engagement plan for the next round of outreach starting in April, which will give the public the opportunity to review and comment on proposed changes to our routes. We'll then take that feedback and adjust the proposals based on what we hear. The BNR takes a combination of analysis of the existing rider market and travel behavior, a toolbox of best practices, and considerations around the built environment, then applies network design principles and prioritizes the customer experience. This results in a system map with service structured around efficient routes, frequencies, and spans that are tailored to the communities that we serve. The ultimate goal of the bus network redesign is to create a more efficient and effective network, and I'd like to briefly touch on why that's important. Effectiveness is about carrying riders and generating revenue. Investing resources where transit is used the most generates more ridership and more fare revenue, which is then used to operate more service or to address funding gaps. Efficiency is about maximizing the use of limited resources, allowing the same level of service to be provided using fewer resources. That includes faster travel times, shorter turnarounds, less non-revenue time. When service can be provided at a lower cost, Valley Metro and our partners can reduce operating expenses and provide more service within the community. By combining these two strategies, we create a network that serves more people and attracts more riders with the same or fewer resources. This is especially critical, as we discussed with the Prop 479 transition that we're experiencing together. The bus network carries about 100,000 riders each weekday, with half of them riding just 15 of our routes. The map will immediately draw your eye to the large clusters of riders in the core of the network, but it's critical to note the parts of the map where there are routes but are few riders. Service levels are generally flat throughout the day, with most routes operating an even 30-minute service, especially on weekends. Ridership patterns vary relative to service levels. Where the purple line is greater than the gray bars, there's an increased demand for service at that time of day. On weekdays, we see strong morning and even stronger afternoon peaks with a sharp decline into the evenings. On weekends, there's a more gradual peak in the mid-afternoon and early evening. A key thing we learned that's not shown here is that on weekends in particular, we see a direct one-to-one drop in ridership commensurate with service levels when compared to weekday service. So if our weekday service is 40% less, if our weekend service is 40% less than our weekday, our weekend ridership is 40% less than our weekday. This tells me that customers ride less on weekends because there's less service to ride. Adding service on weekends only costs 2/5 of adding the same level of service on weekdays. With BNR, we have a real opportunity to not only respond to what customers are saying to us in the engagement phase, which I'll get to in a moment, but also to respond to what they're telling us with their feet and their dollars. I've been talking quite a bit about frequency so I should maybe explain why it's so important or why I think it's so important. Frequency is the number 1 factor that attracts riders to transit. It's what provides flexibility and allows people to ride spontaneously rather than having to plan their day around a fixed bus schedule. Even with real-time bus tracking information, 30-minute service still means you can't leave when you want to, even if you're able to minimize the time you spend waiting at the stop. And in a grid system, riders cannot time effectively their arrivals at transfer points. Currently, 28% of the population is within, 28% of the population is within a half mile of frequent transit. 44% of them are low income and 51% don't have access to a car. The goal of bus network redesign is to expand access to frequent service, especially for those who rely more heavily on transit for mobility. On this slide, it's a little bit of an eye test, but we have 2 maps. The one on the left shows in green the route segments that operate at least every 15 minutes on weekdays in the middle of the day. And the map on the right shows in green the route segments that generate the most riders. There's a pretty clear overlap between these two. This helps make the case for investing in frequency. Even though frequent service costs more to operate, it generates a positive return on investment by generating higher ridership per hour of service. Of course, it's not a complete overlap. There are some segments that are very productive that aren't frequent enough that may warrant more service, or segments that may be overserved relative to demand. In the fall, we conducted an extensive public engagement effort to collect input on how people use the system and their priorities for improvements. The numbers for what we accomplished are on the screen, but I want to call your attention to a few things. We held extensive pop-ups out in the field where we caught riders where they were. We could speak with riders in the midst of their journeys and get a real sense of their experience. We also spoke with our bus operators. There are eyes and ears on the ground. We heard not only their own experience with what they think would work best about the network from just operating it every day, but also we heard from them what they hear from passengers, which is a really critical insight for us. We also conducted a survey and got more than 4,500 responses when we are only scoped for about 1,000. Created a little bit of stress. It wasn't a huge effort. It was a huge effort and gave us a very clear idea of where we should be steering the network in the future. Let's talk more about those riders and who they are. More than half of our riders ride every day, and there's a close split between those who have been riding a long time and those who are relatively new to the system. Most don't have access to a vehicle and have a household income under $50,000. It's critical to note that for many folks, time is literally money and could be the difference between having a job or being unemployed. So providing a network that allows them to minimize time in transit can be life-changing. Regarding survey results, respondents were asked to rank 16 categories on a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of how important each is to them and their level of satisfaction with it. Frequency is rated as the most important by riders. We saw in earlier slides that only 28% of the population is within a half mile of the 15-minute service network. On-time performance was rated second in both the most important and the least satisfied categories, indicating a major gap for riders. We know from industry experience that reliability is the #1 factor in retaining riders. Riders need to be able to rely on the service each and every day. If it's unreliable and infrequent, they will pursue other options. Availability of weekend service had some of the lowest satisfaction. There's currently no frequent bus service on weekends outside of some orbit routes. Rail is frequent, but there's nothing for riders to connect to, making regional transit difficult. Onboard safety and bus stop amenities are important to note, but not directly the purview of the BNR, though I'll touch on that in a minute. For non-riders, frequency and direct service are the 2 key service factors that would drive a shift to transit for some of their trips. We have seen in this process that our riders spend an inordinate amount of time waiting for and riding the bus, which is a barrier to all but those who must rely on transit. It also compounds other issues like heat and safety. The key priority for improving the network is improving frequency. We also receive significant feedback on issues not specific to the bus network redesign effort that we're working on as an agency as well as a region. Some key challenges with the network can be summarized in this graphic, which illustrates how customers experience it, then decide whether to continue to take it. If the overall network isn't structured properly, people will look elsewhere. Next in the decision tree is the network's frequency, then on-time performance, and then finally missed transfers. With each step, riders act with their feet and their dollars if their experience with our service does not work for them. Looking ahead, staff is working with each city to vet and adjust draft network proposals. We'll take that feedback and work with the consultant team to craft a draft plan to present to the public. The goal here isn't to present a plan that we expect to sail through the engagement period, but rather to get real, honest feedback about our community, from our communities about what they like and what they don't like about what we're proposing. We'll then take all that feedback, adjust the plan once more, and bring it to policymakers for consideration as soon as October 2028. With that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions?
Map 26.
Any questions from the committee? Comments? Thank you, Michael. I think the only recommendation just for Tempe to go on record, and I already shared this with Jessica, is just publicizing the BNR recommendations might create a bit of hysteria. If we put ourselves in the shoes of people who are actually using those transit services for many reasons, whether it's single parents or for their jobs, they might get really nervous about what that might mean. So thank you for mentioning the partnership and how we roll that out. But I just ask that for consideration.
We've had some really productive discussions with your staff. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, so we'll move on, and that was from information only. So we'll move on to item number 5, the Valley Metro RPTA fiscal year 2027 preliminary operating and capital budget item. Jessica, I'll turn this over to you to introduce Ken again.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This is the committee's first really in-depth look at the draft FY27 capital and operating budgets, and then Rail Management Committee also follows suit today. The budget is an iterative process. This is our first budget year, of course, where we are fully incorporating Prop 479, including many of the plan changes you've been hearing about this morning. As part of the iterative process, we begin actually with city staff in the fall. We started with financial working group on September 15th of last year, socializing our continuing commitments and budget assumptions, things like contract rates, ridership forecasts, fare revenue forecasts, and other operating revenue forecasts. We share this information, we get feedback and reaction from the cities, and we refine the budget in an iterative process. We have our own, we don't call them budget retreats, but we have budget workshops every other week right now with our executive team where we are working to identify potential savings. And this budget has changed even since our last contact with staff at the RTAG committee level. We, like the cities, are paying very close attention to the financial realities. We understand that our revenues aren't growing as strong as they had been in recent past, and that cities are feeling the acute impact of many changes, especially at the state policy level. We are working to contain costs. I think you'll find that resonate very clearly within the RPTA operating budget you hear today. And then Valley Metro, similar in operations, a little bit different on the maintenance side of things since we are operating a fixed guideway system. So Ken and his team have done, I think, a fantastic job along with the executive team of working with the cities and identifying those savings opportunities. Ken, I'd like you to walk us through the draft budget. And by the way, this is one step in a progression. We'll continue to iterate and refine the budget until its adoption at some point this spring.
All right, thank you, Jessica, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This month is sort of a higher level view of the budget, the first round. And as we go, as Jessica mentioned, in subsequent months with further refinements, we go into greater detail as far as the level of information provided. We'll dive into that next month with staff at RTAG. We're doing an actual combined meeting of the RTAG Financial Working Group and the Intergovs to get into those details. So right now, at this point, this is the look at the use of funds for the RPTA operating and capital budget. You could see here that the majority of the funds are used for passenger services as well as capital activities and the member agency disbursements, which are basically disbursements of PTF funds to member agencies for projects that they're carrying out that they're using PTF funds for. So now looking at the The source of funds breakdown here for the overall operating capital budget for RPTA. You can see that the public transportation funds are by and large the biggest part of that budget, and then member city contributions and federal funds making up the next largest portions of the sources that fund the overall budget for RPTA. Now, looking at the use of funds from a program level, you could see fixed route operations and demand services, obviously our biggest programs within the operating budgets. And then you could see actually year over year, we have an actual slight decline from the current year. Some of that is due to some funding mechanisms. City of Phoenix has been funding some additional fixed route service with PTF, and that has been reflected in our budget. That's been reduced as they've been doing that to kind of use up their JE, as some of the other agencies were doing that on the paratransit side of things. And so if we factor out those other agencies, basically the stuff that's not serves operated by Valley Metro, our overall budget change from year to year is about 1% to 2% right now. So it's a pretty flat budget. And then moving on to the sources of funds for our operating budget. Again, you can see here that the public transportation funds, member city contributions, and fares make up the largest funding sources for the operating program. Now looking at the capital program, the use of funds for capital for FY27, regional fleet purchases, by and large, the largest part of our capital program for RPTA, followed by regional facilities and other regional projects. And then for the sources that fund the capital program, you can see here that PTF and federal funds are the largest sources that fund the capital program for RPTA. And then moving on to the pass-through funds, as I kind of touched on a little bit previously, the uses of pass-through funds, by and large, member agency disbursements. Again, those disbursements to agencies that are utilizing PTF funds for projects that are ongoing. And then as well, VMR personnel, again, reminding folks that all agency personnel are employees of RPTA. And so folks who have efforts on the VMR side of the house, this is treated as a pass-through between the two agencies here. And then just a recap of the important dates here. So we're here in March doing, as I mentioned, kind of the high-level budget presentation. And as we go through the process of here over the coming months, getting into more detail and continuing, as Jessica had mentioned, to refine the budget, looking to identify any cost reductions that we can to incorporate that into the FY27 budget as we go forward. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ken. Any questions for Ken?
I don't know if it's so much a question as I guess it's a request as you're moving, because this is kind of the kickoff, of the budget discussions. And I think moving forward, it's really critical that every effort, and I appreciate that you're trying to do that in terms of cost containment measures. And we're showing obviously kind of a flat proposed budget for next year. But when you talk about, and just because I haven't been in prior budget cycles or approval processes being on this committee, when you get into more detailed information, are you providing detail in terms of like administration? And I have no sense of, like, from an organizational standpoint, what are the positions that you have in administration and how is that kind of allocated out to the different programmatic areas? So that would be good for me to understand in terms of the number of employees and the classification of those employees, and just some more detail about the administration budget for Valley Metro. I'm just not as familiar from an RPTA kind of admin standpoint. So I think that information would be really good to understand at the financial working group level, at the RTAG level, but then when something is presented to this committee, since we're a recommending body, essentially to the board, to really understand that. And what are you doing in terms of cost containment measures for administration? There's certain cost escalations you just can't get away from in terms of what you are contracted to do. And everybody understands the impacts of inflation, and that why that rate's coming down, we don't have deflation, right? So I certainly understand that as a former budget director, but I think that would be really helpful to provide as much transparent information as you can in what you're proposing to this committee and ultimately to the board.
Certainly. Well, yeah, and Madam Chair, members of the committee, we endeavored to do that through the process of getting more detail. And like I said, when we meet with the staff level later this month, just a couple weeks, we'll get into, real great detail there and take their feedback. And if they feel we're missing something, we're certainly open to their suggestions and input on maybe additional changes to what's presented going forward. And we're certainly
Including like
flexible to do that.
vacancies and filled positions and things like that would be helpful.
Sure.
Thank you. I would like also, Ken, thank you for the presentation. I second Amber's request. I think it's important. We're all going through the same process you've heard me mention before in our own cities. And I think it helps us be a good ambassadors for whatever budget, I know this is early, whatever we finally adopt, that we can speak and say, this is what the cost savings have been. And unless we know more of the details, we can't do that. For an example, in Tempe, we did cost savings of 10% per department. We didn't do a hard vacancy freeze, but we did a soft one. So, there would be a little more critical discernment in what positions we're filling, because that helps create some savings. All those things go a long way. And to Amber's point, I think it's important for us to be involved in that conversation, not to criticize, but to obviously, as I say, always be a good ambassadors for what have we done to try to be good stewards of the funding as a regional body. So appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we do, historically, we bring the details to the staff level first. We bring the same level of detail or maybe more depending on feedback, to TMC, RMC, as well as AFS, just to make sure that it's, fully vetted and knowing that, folks on this committee may have a little different thought process than maybe their staff has, and recognizing that, we want to share that same type of information through each step in the process.
We appreciate it. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you, Ken. We'll move on to item number 6, report on current events and suggested future agenda items. I'll ask my colleagues if they have any suggestions for future agenda items or reports on current events. Okay, then we'll move on to item number 7. Next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, April 1st, 2026 at 11 a.m. and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Ryan. Ryan motions to adjourn. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Keeney. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I didn't think so. So meeting is adjourned at 12:32. Thank you. Surgery.
You ready? You ready? Okay. All right, I'll go ahead and convene today's meeting, March 4th, for the Rail Management Committee meeting. We'll move on to the agenda item 1 for the consent agenda. It is presented for action. I'll ask the committee if there are any questions, if there aren't, or any items that need to be pulled for separate discussion. Hearing none, then I'll request a motion and a second to approve consent agenda item number 1.
I motion to approve.
And I second.
Right, motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Nay. Motion passes. All right, moving on to agenda item number 2. This is the Valley Metro Rail fiscal year 26-27 preliminary operating and capital budget. I'll ask Jessica to introduce the item.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm going to ask Mr. Kessler to walk us through the preliminary VMR budget.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, want to present pretty much a similar look at the Valley Metro Rail budget as we looked at for RPTA. Start off with just a look at the use of funds for the total operating and capital budget. So basically, passenger services and capital activities being the majority of our overall budget, passenger services being the largest for next fiscal year. And then in terms of the sources that fund our operating and capital programs, member city contributions, by and large, the biggest source for funding our capital and operating budget, and as well as federal funds in FY27. And then looking at the operating budget specifically by program here, we could see a total this presentation shows a 12%. We didn't have a chance to update the presentation materials, but in the last, say, week or so, we have been able to trim another $2 to $3 million off of this. So as it stands right now, our sort of draft budget behind the scenes is at about 10% year-over-year growth, and we continue to look at that to chip away that number, bring it down. Obviously, you know, we heard loud and clear at the last RTAG and Financial Working Group about where we're at. And I get it too. You know, the double-digit increase year over year is very tough for everybody to accept at this point, given where budgets are at. So we're very mindful of that, and we'll continue to look to reduce that to a point where the member cities feel comfortable. So looking at the programs here, you could see the obviously light rail being the biggest program on their operating budget, and streetcar and agency operating being the other portions of the operating budget. So looking at the sources that fund our operating budget, you could see that member city contributions is the majority, and then fares as well being a big part of supporting the budget, along with some federal funds and some advertising as well. And then looking at our capital program, a much smaller capital program going into FY27. You can see the shift from some of the big extension projects being the bigger portions of the capital budget to, as we move forward, future project development, as well as state of good repair, being large portions of the overall capital program from VMR. And as I mentioned, you know, as our system ages, state of good repair becomes an even more critical part of our overall capital budget to maintain our system and the infrastructure. And so taking a little closer look at the future project development specifically, you can see here that, you know, West Phoenix and Rio East stops in those two corridor specific projects continue on into FY27, being the biggest part of the overall future project development program. As well, we have our general ongoing capital development administration and systems planning and general project development making up the rest of that particular category. And then in terms of the sources of funds for capital, so right now, based on the planned budget at this point, the member city contributions and federal funds make up the largest portion of the overall capital program. So again, same timeline that we reviewed in the RPTA meeting, and that concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ken. Are there any questions from the committee? All right, this item is presented for information only. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, then we'll move to agenda item number 3, report on current events and suggested future agenda items. Are there any items from the committee? All right, hearing none. Our next meeting for the RMC is scheduled for Wednesday, April 1st at 11 o'clock. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
Second?
And second.
All right, so adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.